Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm sharing some cards that comfort using stamps and die cut. I'm using the We All Have Baggage collection from Spellbinders. This die set here is called the Rolling Craft Tote die. Then we have the Designer Purse die set with several different options that you can create there. Then we have the Retro Suitcase die set as well as Sentiment stamp set in there. So we've got some stamps as well as dies to create some custom suitcases as well as sentiments to go with it. Then we have the Awareness ribbon stamp and die set, some beautiful stamps perfect for offering support, and then you can customize the ribbon to what you need. The last stamp set that I'll be using with these cards is called Keep Calm Sentiments stamp set. It is from Hero Arts, but it's perfect to go with this collection. For the first card, I'm using the Rolling Craft Tote die set, and I have my pieces die cut out of Waterfall Cardstock as well as Blue Spruce Cardstock, Anchor Cardstock, and I've got a little bit of matte silver cardstock from the Silver Treasured Cardstock pack. I'm doing a little bit of ink blending on my die cuts using some Evergreen Bow Distress ink. This is just going to add some visual dimension to these die cuts. I'm keeping my overall card design for these very clean and simple. To me, when you're offering someone comfort or support, you don't need to get really complicated with a super impressive card. I think it's the thought that counts, and the sentiments that are included in some of these sets are perfect for customizing that further. Once I have my pieces ink blended, I'm going to start assembling them. I'm going to keep my main piece on my sticky mat so that it just holds them all together. You can take them all off if you want. Sometimes I'll assemble things right on the sticky mat and sometimes I'll take them off. Sometimes it's easier. So once I have my pieces ink blended, and I only ink blended the Waterfall die cuts. Any of the other color die cuts, the color of cardstock is really dark, so you weren't going to see any of the ink blending anyways, as well as the fact that for these Blue Spruce pieces, we're only seeing little bits of it, so it wasn't worth ink blending those. I'm going to use my Barely Art glue in the fine line bottle for gluing everything together. When it comes to assembling die cuts, I find liquid glue is the best because you can move and shimmy it in place. You can add as little or as much glue as you need per piece because of that fine tip. It works for any shape and you don't need to worry about getting it down perfectly the first time. As I am working, I will work from the back to the front of this bag. I do have the package for the die to the side just because I want to make sure that I'm not putting something in an area where I need to put something behind it. However, because we're using liquid glue, it does give you a little bit of forgiveness time. If by chance you put something on too soon and need to lift something up, it's really easy to lift something and put or tuck or insert a piece in between if you need to. So as I'm putting these together, I'm making sure that I have a decent amount of glue. Because I have this on the sticky mat, it's holding everything in place, so I don't really need to worry about moving and shimmying things as I'm going, especially when it comes to these handle pieces, because that top part of the handle piece is die cut out of matte silver cardstock. The Treasured Cardstock packs, they are a non-porous surface, so it does take a little bit longer for that glue to dry. It will dry, but you do want to give it a few extra moments. So by having it sitting on that sticky mat, it gives it that little bit of extra time. But you can see how easy and quickly these come together. I didn't do it for this particular one. I had my accessory pieces to the side, but quite often when I put my things together, I will organize everything before assembly. I find that it just kind of keeps my brain a little bit organized. I'll know that I have all the pieces ready to go, waiting for what I need, and it's really easy to grab the next piece as I'm going. For this particular card, I'm using the Blue Spruce cardstock for my mat, and I've trimmed that down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. I have a piece of white hammermill cardstock for the upper piece of my card, and I've trimmed that to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. For the sentiment for this card, I'm going to be using that Keep Calm Sentiments stamp set. This is a new stamp set that I haven't used before, so the very first thing I like to do is use a white eraser on the stamping surface. This just helps to remove any possible manufacturing residue and helps it to take ink just a little bit better. I also like to stamp in a Missy stamping tool so that I can stamp my sentiments multiple times to make sure that I have a nice, crisp, clean image. Now I am going to keep this one crafting related because to me this tote looks more like a craft tote. However, you could use it for travel if you want and use one of the travel sentiments in the Retro Suitcase set or one of the other sentiments in the Keep Calm sentiment set. Now I stamped that with the Evergreen Bough. That's the same color that I used for my ink blending for the tote. And then I'm ready to assemble my card pieces together. You can see that I die cut some of those dark pieces for that tote right out of that mat because we're adding a layer of white cardstock above it as well as our die cut. We're never going to know anything was die cut out of it. And it's just one of the ways that I extend my cardstock and make it go just a little bit further. I do this quite often. So if you've been here before, you've likely seen me do this before, and you'll see me do this throughout this video too. It's just an easy way to extend the cardstock because we're only seeing the outside parts of that mat. Why not die cut from the inside? For my next piece, I'm going to be using the Designer Purse die set. Now to take it to the next level, I decided to use some of the cardstocks from the Treasured Cardstock packs. So I have the Aquamarine pack that I'm using the brushed metallic finish. I'm using the brushed on the black Treasured pack, and then I use the matte finish on the silver Treasured Cardstock pack. Now those Treasured Cardstock packs have 15 sheets in their total. They have 5 different finishes, so you get 3 sheets per finish, and all of them coordinate together. It's a really great way to add some extra an extra finish, a different type of cardstock. Regular cardstock tends to have a matte finish, so these have all different finishes to them, and it takes your die cuts to the next level. They die cut beautifully. I've never had an issue die cutting any of these Treasured Cardstock pieces, and I like to use them. They're especially great like around Christmas time, but they're great for things like this where you want to just take it up a notch, make it a little bit more special. So I've glued that together with liquid glue as well. But like I said before, because that Treasured Cardstock doesn't have, or is a non-porous surface, it has a coating on the top, you do want to give it just a little bit longer than regular cardstock to dry. It's just going to take a few more minutes. I like to dry it underneath an acrylic block to make sure that everything is nice and flat. So once again, for this card, I'm also going to be using a sentiment from the Keep Calm Sentiments stamp set. Now, there are a lot of appropriate sentiments to choose from here. The one that I have at the top of the card says, "Life's too short." The one that I'm putting at the bottom of the card says, "Buy the craft supplies." But there's also one in the same script that says, "Buy the purse." So if you're a purse lover, you could, or you're giving this to a purse lover, you could easily swap that "Buy the craft supplies" sentiment out for the "Buy the purse" sentiment. And because there are so many different sentiments in that set, you can just customize it to whatever the occasion is or whatever the support thing that you feel you need for that particular card. Because of the black die cut accents for this purse, I chose to do my sentiment with black soot distress ink. You could also use a color if you wanted, but because there's more color on here than black, I thought black was a good option. I am also using that Aquamarine brushed cardstock for the matte on my card, so we're going to see some more color there anyways. So the mat is trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. I said before that this was brush finish. I think it is the mirror finish. I think it's just a little bit too shiny for the brush, I believe. I could be wrong. Now the upper layer here is trimmed down to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches, and then we're ready to add the purse. I opted for this to put a sentiment at the top and then one at the bottom and have the purse in the middle. You could even, if you want, put the purse at the top, put both of them at the bottom, or put the sentiments at the top and put the purse at the bottom. So again, you can customize it to what you need. To add just a touch more set texture, as if the metallic and specialty cardstocks weren't enough, I thought it would be fun to have a little gem as a clasp or as a finish on that purse there. So I used an aquamarine gem. I used one of my new Spellbinders handy tools, the little piercer, the little die pick, to pierce into the adhesive behind that gem and then place it where it needed to go. For the next card, I'm using the Retro Suitcase stamp and die set. I'm starting off with the base for my suitcase, which is die cut out of Fawn Cardstock. I'm using a little bit of vintage photo distress ink to do some light ink blending around it. I want my suitcase to look like it's actually traveled and not totally brand new. So that's the only piece that I'm doing ink blending on for the suitcase. I have a little label that I'm putting on the top that I did do a little bit of ink blending as well, so it looks a little bit aged. The rest of my die cuts are fairly dark pieces of cardstock, so I didn't bother to do any ink blending on those. For some of the metallic accents, I'm using some gold Treasured cardstock, so the handle part there, as well as the buckle on my belt pieces that are going to be around the Suitcase are also out of that gold treasured cardstock. I'm using one of the wax tipped tools from the handy tool set to help lift up some of my smaller die cuts and just place them right into the glue. There's sometimes when that doesn't make sense. So there's sometimes like for this strap here, I want to lift it up and put the glue on there and then put it on my piece. But if you know exactly where your piece is going, you could easily put the glue on first and then just lift up the die cut and place it where it needs to go. Once I have those corners on, I can put both of those straps on and then both of my buckles. This is one of the reasons why I love having metallic cardstocks to choose from, because I think having those buckles in a metallic print or metallic finish really sets it off. It adds a different finish and it makes it look a little bit more authentic. Once we have those done, we have a little string piece here that can go around the handle, and then I can glue my tag down on that suitcase and we're ready to do the rest of our card. You can see how quickly these cards come together. They're very quick and easy, thanks to having the pieces already die cut ahead of time, as well as keeping the designs really, really simple for these cards. So I've set my die cuts over to the side to dry, and while we're doing that, we can prep our stamp from the set. I'm using that white eraser on the stamping surface and then just brushing off any eraser bits. I'm going to use one of the sentiments on the card, but I'm also going to use a couple of those images to kind of look like stickers on that suitcase. Now, you could do these bright colored if you want. You could emboss them for another finish. I'm choosing to just stamp them flat so it looks like a worn, used suitcase with some worn patches on there. So I'm stamping the images on that suitcase with some aged mahogany distress ink. I'm also going to be using that same ink for the sentiment on my card. This coordinates with the Merlot cardstock that I used to die cut the trim for around the outer edges of the suitcase. And then those straps in the corners are die cut out of some Acorn Cardstock. For the mat for this card, I used some Fawn Cardstock trimmed down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. And you can see that I die cut some of my pieces right out of that center. And then my upper layer out of the Hammermill cardstock is trimmed down to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. And I did want to trim that down before stamping my sentiment to make sure that I had it centered properly and I had everything in the right area that I wanted it to go. So I'm putting that in my Misty stamping tool, stamping a couple times with that aged mahogany distress ink to make sure that I have a nice, crisp, complete stamped sentiment. Often I'll do just 2 stamped pieces or two stampings. This time I ended up having to do a little bit more because there was an area that wasn't quite as dark as the rest of the sentiment. That's one of the reasons it's nice to have a stamping tool for that. Now I'm ready to assemble these cards, and the assembly obviously is really, really easy. Once those die cut pieces are assembled together, we can glue them together all as one. So once I have the layers on the base, I can just add that suitcase to the top. Now I'm putting it nice and straight. You could tilt it if you wanted it to be a little bit quirky, a little bit more whimsical, but I just kind of like the straight and simple look with the clean and simple design of these cards. For the last card, I'm using the Awareness Ribbon Stamp and Die Set. So there's a few dies in this set that you can customize for the ribbon. I chose a variety of blues. This is the color that represents colon cancer. I lost a brother to colon cancer about 12 years ago, so I chose this one for that reason, but you can choose it to customize with whichever awareness ribbon coordinates with what you're going for. I also chose the strength word to go on this ribbon. There's one that says hope and one that says strength. So you can pick and choose which one works best for the look, the feel that you want for your card. So I set that ribbon off to the side to finish drying while die cutting the pieces or trimming the pieces for the front of the card. So my mat here is trimmed or cut from Cosmic Sky Cardstock. It is trimmed down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. The other colors I used for the ribbon were Celestial as well as Cascade Cardstock. The upper layer here is trimmed down to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. And those measurements could change if you wanted a wider mat or a wider area around there. You could easily do that. I like to do them kind of fairly symmetrical, and I tend to like the 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches as well as the 3 3/4 inches by 4. Once I have my ribbon on there, I can add my sentiment. Now I chose to do this one where I assembled my card first and then added the sentiment last. I don't do that often. I'll usually add the sentiment ahead of time simply because if I accidentally make a mistake with it, it's easy to swap that piece of cardstock out. Now, because I'm using a stamping tool, it's fairly hard to create a mistake or have a mistake when you're stamping that sentiment, because we can always stamp it again if we don't get a clear impression. It's also really easy with the lines on the front of that MISTI in order to make sure that your sentiment is nice and straight. So I do regularly check with those lines to make sure that I have them straight as well. I'm going to stamp this with some Chipped Sapphire Distress ink. It matches the different blues that I have in my design there. And we have a finished card. Again, super, super simple. But when you're creating a card for comfort, for support, I don't think you need to create something that's really complicated. I think simple is best in my opinion. So here's the finished card done with the awareness ribbon, sentiment, and stamp set. Now there are many sentiments in this set to choose from, so there is a lot of choice in that set. Now we have the card done with the retro suitcase, die, and sentiment stamp set. Then we have our designer purse card. Now all of the supplies that I'm using you'll find listed and linked down in the description box below. So if there's something that I neglected to mention, you'll likely find the answer down there. And then the very first card done with the rolling craft tote die set. Absolutely adorable with that little craft tote there. And I love the keep calm and craft on sentiment on there. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.